A former Facebook data scientist turned whistleblower spoke on Capitol Hill today, telling Congress the social network giant harms children and leads to political polarization. Statements have fueled calls for more aggressive regulation and oversight of the social media behemoth. But could the solution potentially be worse than the problem itself? We'll get into that in tonight's Hold the Line. Welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. We know big tech is a problem. They don't really believe in free speech. They believe in supporting the dominant left-wing narrative. They are effectively appendages of the Democrat Party when it comes to American politics. They will suppress things like the Hunter Biden story in the New York Post right before the election, not because they're untrue, as we know that story was true about Hunter's laptop and his shady connections and dealings, but because they're trying to help out a certain team. Okay, well, what do we do about this? Everyone knows that there should be some action taken if you believe that the digital public square is the most important place where communication occurs these days. So we're all open to ideas and suggestions, but I would urge anybody watching or listening to be very cautious about this Facebook alleged whistleblower, Frances Haugen, who clearly, to me at least, has an agenda at work here. She's saying that if we don't have much more regulation of Facebook, we're going to see things like we did in countries ranging from Myanmar to Ethiopia. Here you go.
My fear is that without action, divisive and extremist behaviors we see today are only the beginning. What we saw in Myanmar and are now seeing in Ethiopia are only the opening chapters of a story so terrifying, no one wants to read the end of it. Congress can change the rules that Facebook plays by and stop the many harms it is now causing. We now know the truth about Facebook's destructive impact. I really appreciate the seriousness which the members of Congress and the Securities and Exchange Commission are approaching these issues. I came forward at great personal risk because I believe we still have time to act. But we must act now.
Act how? Isn't that the million-dollar question here? What exactly does that mean? Well, we know because she's, by the way, being supported by Democrats, tied into a Democrat PR firm. She's a Democrat operative, folks. Pretty clear. What does she want? Doesn't want more freedom of speech on Facebook, that's for sure. No, she wants more oversight. And by that, she means the government assisting by virtue of legislation with the suppression and censorship efforts against disfavored opinions online. Sure, they're going to talk about things like children who have body image issues or something because they've seen too many perfect women who are filtered and all the rest of it on Instagram. But is that really what the concern is for the left when they're talking about the destruction of our democracy that will happen unless Facebook has more oversight? Here she is saying, that's what we need here, by the way, oversight.
Left alone, Facebook will continue to make choices that go against the common good, our common good. When we realized big tobacco was hiding the harms it caused, the government took action. When we figured out cars were safer with seatbelts, the government took action. And when our government learned that opioids were taking lives, the government took action. I implore you to do the same here. Today, Facebook shapes our perception of the world by choosing the information we see. Even those who don't use Facebook are impacted by the majority who do. A company with such frightening influence over so many people, over their deepest thoughts, feelings, and behavior, needs real oversight.
What does that mean? Right? Oversight how? Who gets to do the oversight and what is the purpose of it? That's where you'd start to run into some differences of opinion, I have a feeling. She's saying that Facebook has all these pernicious effects. As we know, Facebook also is something that people use day in and day out, talk to friends, use for their businesses, use to spread information they find very valuable. So there's a tremendous amount of public utility that has been drawn from it as well. So what really is the problem? Well, on the one hand, they'll talk to you about children who have self-esteem issues because of using Instagram, which is owned by Facebook and all falls under this umbrella as well. On the other hand, they'll start to talk about January 6th and the need to block untruthful information about things like COVID or ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine or you name it. They want more censorship. But first, it seems that what Facebook at least should do, according to this, in my view, Democrat activist, is essentially hand itself over to the government for the regulation of conservative speech that is upsetting to liberals on the platform. They want to do everything they possibly can to tilt the playing field of American politics toward the left. So she says Facebook should declare moral bankruptcy. That's what has to happen here.
Part of why Facebook needs to come out and say, we did something wrong, we made some choices that we regret, is the only way we can move forward and heal Facebook is we first have to admit the truth. Like the way we'll have reconciliation and we can move forward is by first being honest and declaring moral bankruptcy.
Again, what does that mean? How is it going to change? What is it going to do differently? Who's going to be in charge of determining what you can see that may or may not affect your self-esteem? That seems like a lot of power to give to any government regulator or entity. I'm sure if the Democrats get their way, what they'd want here is not even for it to be legislation, but the creation perhaps of some unaccountable bureaucracy within the federal government that would allow for diktats to come down from on high about exactly what can and cannot appear on Facebook. But I will say this problem does get complicated pretty quickly because you'll come across conservatives who will say we should break up Facebook. It's a monopoly. And then you'll come across some leftists, believe it or not, like AOC, who for different reasons also want to break up Facebook.
If your life was disrupted by the Facebook outage today, and say you couldn't communicate with loved ones because WhatsApp was down, or maybe your career or your small business took a hit because Instagram was down, and Facebook, and both of these, frankly, were successful independent apps until Facebook identified them as a competitive threat and decided to purchase them due to monopolistic anti-competitive behavior. Maybe we should be asking ourselves why one company is trying to monopolize the internet, communication platforms, and digital commerce, and maybe we should break them up.
She's not wrong necessarily. See, we speak the truth here on the show. She's not wrong about breaking it up. It's fascinating that there are leftists who want to break it up because they hate corporations. Even sometimes it seems when the corporations are doing their political bidding, they still don't like the capitalist freedom that can exist within a corporate atmosphere. They'd much rather have the full-on government control of and regulation of an entity like this. If it's treated like a public utility, some of us think that that will then create a free speech haven, but it also then could just mean that you have government regulators who are determining the bounds of acceptable speech, which creates huge First Amendment challenges. So not an easy problem, but don't trust Democrats who say that they want to make things freer and fairer online, because they don't. All right, the Department of Justice has announced it is launching efforts to combat threats of violence against school officials. But could this just be a way for the federal government to treat angry parents like domestic terrorists? We'll have more on this with the First TV's Morgan Zegers when we come back. I want to tell you about my friends at My Digital Money. Crypto market's hot right now. Bitcoin, Ethereum, so many tokens out there that can take off like a rocket ship if you're in at the right time, but also could have huge drops. Very volatile, a lot of stuff going on here, right? That's where My Digital Money comes in. It's an easy-to-use, self-trading crypto IRA platform with incredible customer service. They'll actually answer your phone calls, and this is a US-based company. You are their absolute top priority. Your security, your ease of use. Trust me on this. This is the crypto platform you need to be using. When it comes to your money, you deserve a team of dedicated professionals who have your back, speak to you honestly, and treat you like a human, not a number. Check them out at mydigitalmoney.com. That's mydigitalmoney.com. We'll be right back with the First TV's Morgan Zegers in a moment. The critical race theory debate has caused chaos in school board meetings across the country over the past few months. And now the Justice Department's going after parents who say they're harassing or intimidating school teachers. This comes after the National School Board Association likened parents who oppose the progressive curriculum and mask mandates to domestic terrorists. Let's talk about some overreach, friends, and bring in founder of Young Americans Against Socialism and contributor here at the First TV, Morgan Zegers. Morgan, how are you?
I'm great, Buck. Thank you. And this topic is right up my alley, so I'm excited.
Yeah, what's with the Attorney General Merrick Garland saying they're going to be looking at some kind of a task force on dealing with all the threats against teachers as a federal crime situation? That seemed very weird.
Yeah, I mean, it is a little weird to be using FBI resources to target passionate parents that are just concerned about the indoctrination and sexualization of their babies. But what I'm seeing here, Buck, I don't know if you remember what happened with January 6th. Obviously, that was wild. Obviously, most Americans don't align with what actually happened on the Capitol and with the people that were actually destroying historic property. Some really bad stuff happened that day, but that wasn't indicative of what was going on nationwide. In fact, it's really just this fringe situation that happened. And what happened in the few situations of violence at these school board meetings was really just people getting rowdy. And now that was that small justification that's needed for our national bureaucracy to come and use their law enforcement resources and tactics to intimidate parents from speaking out against the leftist indoctrination that's happening in the classroom.
Here's a letter from the National School Board Association that they sent to Biden last week. NSBA believes immediate assistance is required to protect our students, school board members, and educators who are susceptible to acts of violence affecting interstate commerce because of threats to their districts, families, and personal safety. The classification of these heinous actions could be the equivalent of a form of domestic terrorism and hate crimes. That seems like pretty extreme language for an organization to be sending to the president and demanding immediate federal government resources to address it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't know about you, Buck. I get called a white supremacist, a Nazi, a sexist, a bigot, and a domestic terrorist like every other day. Not just online, but in person. People say it to my face. I get called a sexist. Yes, I am a woman. That is apparently a sexist to the left. So they throw out these terms all the time. The problem is it's no longer just these slurs on social media. Right now, the FBI and these major bureaucratic groups of our federal government are using this kind of behavior from the radical left and from these teacher union organizations, these school board organizations, to target us as actual domestic terrorists at a school board level. So that's what's going on here. It's no longer just fringe social media attacks. The federal bureaucracy is coming after parents. Now, what's really concerning here is they're saying that they're doing this to protect the students, when in reality, our students need to be protected by the radical teachers, teachers unions, and school boards that are trying to indoctrinate them and make them into government property, not our babies.
Attorney General Garland, according to Ron DeSantis, who put this out in a tweet, the governor of Florida, is weaponizing the DOJ by using the FBI to pursue concerned parents and silence them through intimidation. Florida will defend the free speech rights of its citizens and not allow federal agents to squelch dissent. It certainly does feel like when the DOJ is putting out a threatening statement about people who oppose parents who oppose CRT being taught to their kids in schools, it is time to really worry about not just the chilling effect that this will have on free speech, but the possibility of real follow-up and government overreach that could result in FBI agents knocking on doors saying, hey, we heard you were at that anti-mask meeting at the school board. Can we talk to you for a bit? Which will send a chill down a lot of people's spines.
Exactly. And I have many friends that were reporters and journalists that were just covering the January 6th situation, and they've been getting lots of calls from our federal bureaucracy. Same thing of, I heard you were in the area, you were in town, what were you doing? Tell me more about it. And we're going to see that with every political situation now. This is just the new standard of politics. COVID has been politicized, and now if you disagree with the radical left on their policies, they will use our national law enforcement weaponized against you to continue their own political platform. What's concerning here, when you look at the bigger picture, I've talked to you about this before, Buck. There's that checklist throughout history of what happens as the left rises to power. This is a situation and an example of three different parts. You have the rise of the totalitarianism aspect, so that cancel culture we talk about, where you remove people from the public square, you stifle political opposing thought. That's what's happening here in just the sense of silencing these parents and scaring them from wanting to speak out. You have First of all, straight up, the indoctrination of our kids. It's a major aspect of the rise of the radical left, especially in the 20th century. And now we're seeing the weaponization of our bureaucracy against the people. And we see this also in situations of them attacking political thought leaders like Tucker Carlson. Remember, recently, the NSA was exposed for spying on him.
Morgan, wanted to switch gears for a moment to the Facebook so-called whistleblower Frances Haugen, who testified before the Senate committee today. There she is. What do you think is really going on here? Why are we seeing this person who clearly has some of the Democrat apparatus in her corner pretending that this is all about safety online and Facebook are the bad guys, but the way they become the good guys is by censoring, it seems. What's happening here?
Yeah, well, Buck, I think the fact that you're asking me what's really going on here shows that we are getting smarter. We are starting to catch on to the fact that a lot of this is propaganda. A lot of what we see on national news as stories is really just manufactured by the people in rooms in Washington, D.C. This is a perfect example. And I remember last, probably a week or so ago, we were talking about the distraction propaganda of Afghanistan, how they announced these mandates, vaccination mandates that would affect 100 million people. I think that they specifically decided to announce those mandates because it would distract people from the crisis that they created in Afghanistan, because all of a sudden people had to worry about where they were going to be able to put food on the table. Now, what we're seeing here, they are telling us they're doing this for our safety, for our security, for the preservation of the First Amendment and free speech. And not only that, but for our democracy. Same thing as like democracy dies in darkness for the Washington Post. When they use that kind of terminology, it concerns me because they say they want to combat extremism. But to these leftists, to these liberals, and to these Democrats specifically on the Hill, to them, extremism politically that they want to censor only has to do with the right. They do not see Antifa, Black Lives Matter, the self-identifying communists and Marxists that are rising up and trying to literally overtake the United States of America. They don't see them as a problem. The only extremists they want to inhibit and focus on are the right. And if you just saw what we were talking about, that includes parents that are worried about sexualization and radical political indoctrination in curriculum.
Morgan, good to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Buck.
Shocking videos continue to emerge from Australia as authorities in that country enforce strict lockdown measures and mask mandates. So just what happened to the land down under? Coming up, we'll talk to the CEO of the Foundation for Liberty and American Greatness and Australian expat Nick Adams. But first, I want to talk to you about protecting yourself from online crime. You know, the Social Security Administration computer servers are 45 years old. I mean, cyber criminals have had a pretty easy time hacking into things like the U.S. Census Bureau's computers. Everything on you is stored there, you know that. The threat of some cyber thief stealing your credit card isn't your biggest risk. Your massive risk is he takes the ownership over of your home. It's called home title theft. Here's how it goes down. Cyber criminals hack into vulnerable government, bank, or mortgage company servers where copies of your home's title is stored. He then forges your signature stating you sold your home to him. Then he borrows on your home and leaves you in debt. You won't know until collection notices show up. Protect your most valuable asset. Go to HomeTitleLock.com and register your address to see if you're already a victim, and use promo code RADIO for 30 free days of protection. Again, that's HomeTitleLock.com, promo code RADIO, HomeTitleLock.com. We'll be right back with more. Hold the line. Australia continues to descend into tyranny under the power trip they call COVID control. Two of Australia's most populous states, New South Wales and Victoria, have tried facial recognition apps, which allows the government to check if residents are at home during the COVID-19 quarantine. One Australian premier has completely banned the unvaccinated from participating in everyday society and is forcing state police officers to arrest innocent people, sometimes aggressively, just because they're not wearing a mask in public. At what cost does all this come? The Australian state of Victoria reported a more than 50% jump in daily COVID cases, and the government is quick to blame people who breach pandemic regulations simply because they want to live their lives. It's unbelievable. Joining me now is Nick Adams, founder and CEO of the Foundation for Liberty and American Greatness. He is also an Aussie by birth, and he is with us now. Nick, good to see you.
Good to see you, Buck.
People in this country see what's going on in Australia and think, how is it possible that the country that we thought of as a warmer UK with friendlier people has turned into East Germany with koalas. What do you say?
Buck, as someone that was born there, raised there, lived there for the first 32 years of my life, I've got to be honest with you, nothing that is currently occurring in Australia surprises me in the slightest, nor anybody that I know that lives there. This is what Australia does. Anyone that's tried to visit Australia will know that if you bring in the wrong kind of fruit or the wrong kind of nut, you may as well bring in a kilo of cocaine. You're going to get treated like a Colombian drug dealer. It's kind of the way that Australia does things. It's an island nation. It leans socialist. It's got its origins as a penal colony, which means that it believes in very tough enforcement, very strict rules. It's bred a culture of compliance among its people. I think the only thing that this has really done is open up the eyes of the rest of the world to see that the international perception of Australia is actually dramatically different to the domestic reality.
How bad is it there when you talk to friends and family that you know back in Australia, Nick? I mean, are they appalled by this? Are they saying, okay, well, it's just temporary? I mean, what's the sentiment among people that you know when it comes to a country that right now, it seems, has even more extreme lockdown measures than communist China?
It does. I mean, certainly without a doubt. Right now, the old Soviet Union, communist China has got more, the people of those places got more freedom than the people of Australia. I think it's a hybrid of the two, Buck. I think that there are a lot of people that I've spoken to that are extraordinarily frustrated with everything. In Sydney, where most of my clan comes from, they've been in lockdown since late June, so it's been a long time. So they're very frustrated with what's going on. I think, though, the prevailing sentiment beneath the frustration is that this is a temporary surrender of liberty in order to get what they might consider a good public outcome, and that things will go back to normal once I don't know, the vaccine levels have reached a certain point or whatever it is. I'm certainly not offering any kind of a defence, but just to give your viewers and listeners a little bit of an idea of the mentality of Australians, I think that that's probably what's going through their minds, that this is an event, a pandemic that has necessitated a surrender of personal liberty for a certain period of time, and they've just got to do it. It's the same kind of idea, Buck. When I was 11 and a half years old in 1996, the government imposed some of the most cumbersome and strict gun laws in the world ever. And everyday Australians, as part of a gun buyback scheme, unquestioningly went and handed in voluntarily their firearms to the local police station. So it's kind of the same idea. They think that in the interests of public safety and the greater collective good, these individual surrenders of liberty are necessary.
Here's an idea for everyone who's watching this of just how extreme that bargain, if you will, of individual liberty in exchange for the collective good or collective safety, as you point out, Nick. There are now apps where people get phone calls they have to answer within 5 minutes and then send a selfie to geo-track where they are to comply with lockdown regulations. Watch this.
Today, the call has gone out to everyone in home quarantine in Victoria to take part of our pilot program. And what that means is that they will receive random phone calls and they have to answer within 5 minutes with a selfie sent to this app, which will then geo-track where that person is and to make sure that they are who they say they are as well. If they don't answer within that 5 minute period, that's when health officers come knocking, Pete.
They're going to send the cops to your home in Australia if you don't answer their random phone calls within 5 minutes and immediately take a selfie to show you're complying with the stay-at-home orders they have for people. This is nuts.
Yeah, insanity doesn't begin to describe it, Buck. It certainly is, and it's a cautionary tale for the United States of America. What the Australian mindset, if I might be as bold as to kind of diagnose it, what the Australian mindset doesn't understand, what their practicality doesn't take into account, is how terrible the left are and the reality that if you give the left an inch at any time, they will take a mile. And that's exactly what happens. If you start giving in a little bit to the left, in the end, you end up surrendering everything. And I'm just glad that people in the United States are not at that point. And I would really urge every American, Buck, to consider very carefully. I mean, if anybody thinks that the Democrats in the United States of America are not looking at Australia with secret admiration and gleeful about what's going on, they're wrong. Democrats would love to do what is happening in Australia right now. I really believe that. And so,
can I ask you, Nick, also before we let you go back to the fight for freedom here, which feels like it's not going well these days for any of us. The Prime Minister of New Zealand, Prime Minister Ardern, has announced that New Zealand will be abandoning its COVID-0 goal because of the Delta outbreak. Here's what she said.
With this outbreak and with Delta, the return to zero is incredibly difficult, and our restrictions alone are not enough to achieve it quickly. In fact, for this outbreak, it's clear that long periods of heavy restrictions has not got us to zero cases. But that is okay. Elimination was important because we didn't have vaccines. Now we do. So we can begin to change the way we do things. We have more options, and there's good cause for us to feel optimistic about the future. But we cannot rush. This is a change in approach we were always going to make over time. The Delta outbreak has accelerated that transition, and vaccines will support it.
Vaccines, as she says, are very important now, so they're going to open, but slowly. What does that mean?
Well, Australia really did the same thing, Buck. They decided to pursue this very foolish, impossible target of zero COVID. And then now the whole bar has changed to be about vaccination rates. What they should really be looking at, I think, are hospitalisation rates, and there's a variety of different ways to measure it. But I think that essentially what she's saying is we know that we're never going to have zero COVID. It's a pandemic that is endemic in the world, and so now we're going to change the yardstick with which we measure success. And I just hope that means that more quickly than what would have been, people will get their freedom back in New Zealand.
Nick, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.
Buck, it's always a pleasure.
All right, if you thought the last wave of illegal migrants at the border was a problem, my next guest is going to tell you ain't seen nothing yet. Coming up, Jeff Teagues, Chief Operating Officer of All Things Possible Ministries, who's been down to the southern border, seeing what's going on, is going to tell us what's really happening. Before that, I want to tell you one more time about my friends at My Digital Money. Everybody wants to get into crypto these days, right? Bitcoin, Ethereum, so many digital tokens out there that can really take off, and people can make a lot of money. They got to get in at the right time. They got to know what they're doing. That's why you need My Digital Money. It's a self-trading crypto IRA platform with top-tier customer service. They'll actually answer your phone call and help you get started if you've never invested in crypto before. Look, the crypto market's heating up. This might be the best time in a long time to get into this exciting technology-based investment. When it comes to your money, you deserve a team of dedicated professionals who have your back and speak to you honestly. Check them out at mydigitalmoney.com. That's mydigitalmoney.com. We'll be right back.
Migrants are being coached to seek asylum. They're being coached to try to achieve refugee status. This mural that we see painted behind us has instructions on the key words, the push-button words that will get them through into the next phase. They have to say that they are afraid, that they're running from danger, and that they are being persecuted. These are key words that have to be said in order for them to get beyond the authorities.
Incredible. It's been a little over a week since the migrant camp in Del Rio, Texas was cleared out, and already reports abound of tens of thousands more who are on their way. The path of these migrants is treacherous. These caravans literally leave a trail of bodies in their wake. This photo was taken in Panama recently, where authorities have been burying a record number of migrants in what are essentially mass graves. The dead are interred with a plastic card containing what little information is known about them in case someone comes looking for them one day. It's heartbreaking stuff, but also predictable, considering the Biden administration's policies have proven to be an irresistible draw for thousands and thousands of people from all over the world. All Things Possible Ministries has been on the border and in Central America to witness the tragedy firsthand. Chief Operating Officer Jeff Teagues joins us now. Jeff, thank you for being with us.
Buck, good to see you again.
All right, the trek north for many of these migrants is quite dangerous. Can you tell us about some of the dangers they face along the way? I mean, we're seeing photos now of bodies. That's often not reported in the press up here in the States.
Yeah, Buck, I think too often the American public doesn't start thinking about these migrants till they're already on our southern border. And when I saw you last, when we were in Texas, most of the people that we were seeing were coming from north of the triangle. So you're talking about, Ecuador and all these countries that are north of Panama and the Darien Gap, and that very dangerous, treacherous strip of land is about 60 miles long. But what we're seeing now is the Haitians and the Cubans that have successfully crossed the Darien Gap, and they are moving very rapidly. So once they get through that gap, which, by the way, those bodies that you're seeing, we're hearing reports between 1 and 7 of the people that enter that trek don't come out on the other side. And we should be hitting the high water mark on that, no pun intended, with the rainy season. But we actually thought we would see a drop in the amount of migrants that were coming through the Darien Gap and through that jungle trek. When some of our partners were down there a couple months ago, there was about 300 a day coming out of the jungle. When we were there a few weeks back, it was over 1,000 a day coming out of the jungle and just flooding this little town of Baja Chiquito, which is an Indian town, a native town of a couple hundred people. But then once they survive that trek, they're put on buses through Panama, through Costa Rica, through Guatemala, up until the Mexican border. And then it really is up to Mexico if they're going to hold them for a while at the city of Tapachula or move them all the way up to our border, which is what we saw just a few weeks back.
We've talked a lot here,
and thousands
Jeff,
of them.
We've talked a lot here, Jeff, about the draw, the incentive that's pulling so many migrants north, but that's not the whole story. Can you tell us about the machine, if you will, the machinery that is actually pushing so many migrants from south of our border up to the U.S.-Mexico border? I mean, how are they getting there and who's helping them?
It's funny, when you look at some of the imagery that we've captured, the smugglers are working in broad daylight. They at the Guatemala-Mexico border, they have T-shirts that say coyotes on them. They have a cute little symbol. It's Coyote Plaza is where they're coming across. You're seeing these bus drivers that are very, very open in the fact that their job is to move migrants. So it's hard to blame a country like Panama, Guatemala, Costa Rica for not having the infrastructure to handle these thousands and thousands of migrants, but they're doing their best to move them through with the ultimate stop at the United States. And Buck, one thing I want to highlight is I'm tired of the Biden administration talking about what the current events in Haiti and Cuba. These Haitians and Cubans that are coming to the U.S. border, they haven't been in Haiti or Cuba for 3 to 5 years. They're not leaving Haiti and Cuba because of recent events. They left those points of origin years ago, and the bug light that is the Biden administration is what's pulling them here now.
I want to also know if you can tell us more, Jeff, about why is it that there's been this surge specifically among Haitian and Cuban migrants? Is it just that word spread within those communities? Do you have any sense of how all of a sudden, by the way, I was told just earlier today by Congressman Eddie Biggs of Arizona that the number in Del Rio wasn't 15,000, it was 26,000, and that all but about 2,500 of them were let into the United States, to give everyone a sense of just what the numbers really are when they get to the border and how likely they are to be let into the United States. Why is it this surge of Cuban and Haitian migrants, Jeff? Do we have any idea why?
The word is out. They're reaching back home. They're recognizing how easy it is to get through. And Buck, I'm a little disappointed. I thought I was going to break some news for you today. For the same with our reports from the border. The administration saying that they're sending these migrants back to Haiti is a complete lie. It's the same numbers that you just reported that we're hearing. Those migrants are now in the interior of the United States. And again, think about these men and women and these families that left Haiti 4 or 5 years ago. you're going to be hard pressed to stick them on an airplane and return them to Haiti. You're going to have a serious uprising. So the people that are all through Central and South America that have been there for years, they're getting word from their relatives that now is the time. It's now or never. Get to the U.S. border.
The founder of All Things Possible, Victor Marx, has described the coming wave of migrants as a tsunami. Jeff, what is coming? I mean, for the people watching this right now, what's going to happen over the next 30 days at the U.S.-Mexico border?
Well, again, I think if we just use some simple math, what we saw coming out of the Darien Gap was about 300, and then that resulted in tens of thousands on the U.S. border. We're tripling or even quadrupling that number of what we've seen of late. So really the only thing that's going to get in the way is what Mexico wants to do. They are massed at the town of Tapachula, and every time Mexico wants to open that valve and lighten some of that pressure on their own, they're just going to stick them in buses and take them right to our border. So I would predict before it starts getting too cold, we're going to see an exact replica of what we've already seen at our southern border. I'm not saying it's going to be Del Rio. I don't fully understand how they're making their choices between Del Rio and McAllen and these other locations. But I do think, like we've talked before, that decision is tied into the drug cartels and just whom and where and when do they want to flood with humans so they can move their products.
Jeff, appreciate your work on this, sir. Thanks for coming by. We'll talk to you about this again soon.
Good to see you, Buck. Take care.
Unvaccinated healthcare workers across the country are being fired for exercising their right to choose. Coming up, we'll show you what one UCLA doctor had to say as he was being escorted out of the hospital. But I want to talk to you about a potential investment opportunity right now. You ever thought about investing in real estate? Take me up on this recommendation right now. Visit doneforyoubuck.com where you can learn more about my friends at Done For You Real Estate. If you haven't checked them out, let me make this easy for you. These guys have found a way to make real estate investing straightforward, and their system flat out works. I know because I'm using it. It allows everyday, hardworking Americans like you and me to finally own investment real estate without all the risk and difficulty of doing it on your own. I can't tell you in strong enough terms during this quick commercial how important it is you check these guys out. So how about this? If you visit doneforyoubuck.com, at the top of the page is a podcast interview I did with Done For You Real Estate where you can hear my personal experience with their company in my own words. I'll tell you about it in detail, from picking the city, the house, getting the broker, the loan, even getting a tenant in place so I get cash flow coming to me every month. Visit doneforyoubuck.com, listen to the podcast interview, and give my friends a chance to show you what they can do for you. We'll be right back with Quick Hits. Hunter Biden's under fire for his $500,000 art sales, and Andrew Yang wakes up and quits the Democrat Party. It's time for Quick Hits. Let's start with this doctor who's unvaccinated at UCLA. He was escorted out of the hospital because, as you know now, a lot of places, a lot of employers have fired people for refusing the shot. They will fire you. They will terminate you, including healthcare personnel, which is particularly interesting because a lot of these healthcare personnel have natural immunity, which means scientifically speaking, there's no basis for forcing them to get the shot. But that's what the policy is because of the Fauciites out there. And on top of that, a lot of these healthcare workers were on the front lines fighting against the virus when we knew less about it. It was more dangerous. There was more concern out there, understandably. And now they're getting fired. Well, here's what this doc who refused the shot at UCLA said as he was escorted out of the hospital.
I am being escorted out of 200 Medical Plaza at Westwood, Santa Monica for standing up for freedom. What's your title, sir?
Don't come near me.
What's your title?
Don't come near me.
Okay. This is what happens when you stand up for freedom and when you show up to work, willing to work, despite being unvaccinated. And this is the price you have to pay sometimes. But what they don't realize is that I'm willing to go lose everything. Job, paycheck, freedom, even my life for this cause.
That guy's an MD. Seems to take the whole vaccine mandate rejection issue pretty darn seriously. Andrew Yang is formerly a Democrat. As you remember, he ran as a Democrat for president. and was even trying to be the mayor of New York City, but he has decided to quit the Democrat Party because he realizes, well, here's what he said. I'm confident that no longer being a Democrat is the right thing to do. Our system is stuck. Many of the people I know are doing all of the good they can, but their impact is constrained. Now that I'm not a member of one party or another, I feel like I can be even more honest about both the system and the people in it. Andrew Yang going his own way here, deciding that he has had enough of the Democrat machine around him, constantly limiting his ability to be honest and have real worthwhile discussions. It's understandable why someone like Andrew Yang would have a problem with being a Democrat today. Will he perhaps catch on even more politically as an independent? Time will tell. Obama's ethics chief Walter Schaub says that Hunter Biden is selling art for $500 because, well, yeah, obviously, he's the president's son.
And I think it would be very hard to draw a bright line rule here, but the standard could be, don't capitalize on your relationship to the president. And I know this is not a popular view among many, but this is a case where this individual would not be selling 13 pieces of art for $500,000 a piece if he wasn't the president's son. So let him be an artist and let him sell them at the Torpedo Factory in Alexandria, Virginia for $500 to $2,000 a piece, or let him have a big fancy show in New York with all the celebrities and all the fanfare, but not sell the art. There's plenty of things they could do along the lines of art.
Yeah, this is called corruption, by the way. He's selling them for $500,000. He's selling paintings, folks. Hunter Biden, a guy who has done crack and got kicked out of the military for using drugs and had fathered the child out of wedlock with a stripper that he denied, and that guy is selling paintings for $500,000 a piece. But Democrats really care a lot about corruption. Yeah, that's for sure. The White House tweeted something yesterday. The Build Back Better agenda costs $0. The plan will ensure the ultra-wealthy pay their fair share and won't raise taxes on anyone making less than $400,000 a year. That's a big deal. It obviously costs a whole lot more than $0. And the insistence from Democrats on this has become really annoying because it's so obviously untrue, but they don't care how untrue it is. If they can get away with it, they're going to keep saying it. That's it for tonight's Hold the Line. The No Spin News with Bill O'Reilly is up next. Shields high.